I don't want no oil a-spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus. And a big hello to everyone in Bowling Green or anyone listening on the internet wherever or whenever you may be. My name is Shehbaz Khan, and I'm here with my jocular co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Welcome, Rebecca. Together, Rebecca and I are going to bring you another amazing hour of radio called For a Green Future. This show, For a Green Future, is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about those subjects in the way that they affect you, your wealth, your health, and your happiness. And the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and family, and the wealth and health and happiness of the forests, and the salmon, and the bumblebees, and the wolves. Because, like it or not, the health of all of us is tied up together as we try to survive on this tiny little planet called Earth. We have a great show for you today. First, we are going to chat a little bit. Then, we are going to do something a little different today. Regular listeners know that we interview a wide range of guests, scientists, activists, government officials, and so forth. But until now, those guests all have something to do with the environment or ecology. This week, we are going to change it up a little bit. We are going to interview an engineer, but he's not working on an environmental project. We are going pure science this week. We will be interviewing Aaron Sayer. He worked on the James Webb Space Telescope. In fact, he was responsible for the manufacture of those amazing beryllium mirrors that are creating those breathtaking photos we have been seeing from deep space. Then, at the bottom of the hour, we'll hear from our generous patrons and sponsors. After that, we'll hear from Rebecca. Rebecca, what will you be discussing today?
We will be talking about Patty Gonia, the drag backpacker.
Wow. Definitely looking forward to hearing about that.
Yes.
Okay, after Rebecca, it will be time for ecological news. We also, by the meantime, we also hope that you will call us at 877-909-1007. This is a call-in show and it gets better every time you call. We really appreciate your feedback. And just a reminder, comments can also be texted to 419-973-5841. I repeat, 419-973-5841. You can send your comments, send your suggestions, your feedbacks. You can also share your experiences, provide us with information about nature and ecology, and your observations about what's going around you. You can also email it to joe@joedemeyerforagreenfuture.org. I repeat, joe@joedemeyerforagreenfuture.org. All right. The big environmental news story this week has been the Canadian wildfires and the effect the smoke is having on us. Those of you who were lucky enough to catch last week's show know that we scooped most of the nation's media because we were talking about those fires and their effects days before they were picked up by the mainstream media. We are not going to spend a lot of time this morning talking about the Canadian fires again, except to give you some quick updates. And here are the updates. The number of acres burned so far in Canada has jumped from 2.7 million hectares last week to 3.3 million hectares. That's an increase from 6.6 million acres to 8.2 million acres. The number of fires have skyrocketed from 200 to 413. 250 out of the 413 fires are out of control. This is going to be Canada's worst fire season in recorded history by far. As our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., was engulfed in smoke from those fires, we happened to catch a US Senate public hearing on forestry policy on C-SPAN. On Thursday, June 8th, there was a meeting of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. It was chaired by the evil Joe Manchin. Now, children, let me tell you a story of how things used to be. Once upon a time, the way congressional hearings worked was that you would have various experts called on to testify before a committee. There would be experts with different perspectives on the problems. They would give different testimonies, sometimes conflicting testimonies, and the senators would ask them questions. Most frequently, what would you see was representatives from citizens groups like the Sierra Club, for example, versus representatives from industry like the timber industry. The purpose of the hearing was finding out the truth so that the senators could make the right decision when they voted on a question. There were experts at that hearing on Thursday, and they made brief opening statements, but they were not really there for their expertise. During the questioning, senators only referred back to them briefly, asking leading questions that only took one-word answers. What the hearing was used for was for the senators to repeat over and over positions they already had. The Republicans' positions were all very consistent, and they used the same words and phrases as each other. Those positions were exactly those of the timber industry. Basically, they were saying that we have to cut down the forest in order to save it. Each of them used the Canadian wildfires and the smoke that was choking Washington, D.C. as an excuse to advocate for highly managed forests with the most of the trees cut down for fire mitigation. Trees have to be mechanically thinned. That sounds innocent enough, but in practice, what it leads to is clear cutting and destruction of old growth forest. Right now, our forests, according to Republicans, are overstocked. That is, there are too many trees. The only cause for the severe fires we have been experiencing that Republicans talked about was our century of fire suppression. Because we put out any fires that started over 100 years, dead wood built up on the forest floor that dries out and catches fire easily, leading to more hotter fires. That is the one part of what Republicans said that was true. But the only problem, according to the Republicans, was that we aren't cutting down enough trees fast enough. That part is false. The striking thing about the Republican testimony was that the timber industry has moved from sitting at microphones facing the committee, testifying to the senators, to having the senators testify up on the dais, testifying for the industry. Unfortunately, when the Democrats spoke, it wasn't much better. The main difference was that all the Democrats said that the reason we are having more and hotter fires was directly tied to global warming. That much is both obvious and true. But none of the Democrats argued of protecting old growth. By not arguing that any forest needs to be protected from logging, they tactically agreed with the Republicans that we need to do more cutting. In fact, the witnesses at this hearing were mostly representatives from the Biden administration. They were from the Department of the Interior and Department of Agriculture. Those witnesses enthusiastically agreed with the Republicans that we should be cutting down more trees faster. In fact, they bragged about the 50 million acres of forest that the Biden administration is in process of cutting down right now. One of the main points they made was that they need even more resources so they can cut more trees more faster. The Republicans made a bunch of statements given to them from the timber industry that just aren't true. For one thing, they repeated over and over again that privately owned forests, which presumably are logged more aggressively than public lands, don't have as many big, hot forest fires as public lands. This is simply a big fat lie. In fact, the opposite is true. Private lands that are clear cut leave piles of slash, that is, branches and tree tops left lying on the ground as trees are turned into logs. Another word for slash could be kindling. These leftovers dry out and are ready to catch fire and burn much faster and hotter than the forest that was there before. If you ever sat at a campfire, you know that the thin, dry stuff burns faster and hotter than the big logs. It's exactly the same principle. The more we turn deep forest with old trees into scrublands filled with saplings, the worse forest fires will be. Another Republican repeated the old timber industry idea that all forests should be thinned out enough for sunlight to reach the forest floor. This also is false, ecologically speaking. It should be pretty obvious that a forest where sunlight can penetrate all the way to the forest floor is going to be drier. Sunlight dries out the ground. So a drier, thinner forest is much more likely to catch fire and burn hotter. The Republicans also talked about how forest fires put carbon into the air. This is the closest they came to admitting global warming is real. While that is true, if you go back to our July 2022 episode where we interviewed Ralph Bolmers, the maker of the film Elemental, you'll hear that a forest that is burned and then allowed to regenerate naturally still sequesters most of the carbon that was in it before the fire. The reason is that over half the carbon is in the soil, not the tree trunks. The carbon in the ground stays there after a fire unless we screw things up. When us humans come in and cut down all the trees, exposing the ground to direct sunlight, the carbon in the ground starts evaporating into the air. So, after clear cutting, for about 20 years, forests change from carbon sinks, that is, places where carbon is taken out of the air, to carbon sources, that is, they put more carbon into the air than they take out. Not one of the falsehoods the Republicans spouted was contradicted by the witness or the Democrats on the committee. Instead of a place where our legislators work towards finding the truth, the hearing became simply a place of misinformation to be spread. It is also important to note that the voice of citizens was completely absent. While the Republicans gave us the timber industry's view of the world, no one gave the view of scientists, environmental organizations, or the public supporting the idea that old growth forests are valuable and should be saved for future generations. Instead,
The Republican senators mocked the National Environmental Protection Act, or NEPA, and cried out frivolous lawsuits that have slowed down or even stopped logging in some places. Driven from the legislative chambers, citizens who want to protect the environment have been forced into the courts. Many of the senators talked about legislation that would prohibit NEPA lawsuits in the future. Chairman Joe Manchin, whose testimony was indistinguishable from the Republican senators, summed up the attitude towards forests at the very end. He said, and I quote, "Let's cut them down and sell the timber," unquote. So, after that depressing experience, we felt the need to step back a little and just look at something cool and beautiful. The universe is always beautiful. Even though most of us can't see most stars from the ground anymore, we know that above the clouds of soot and smoke we have created, the stars still shine as beautiful and untouchable as ever. We know this because we have telescopes out there in space watching them. The granddaddy of all telescopes, the James Webb Space Telescope, or JWST, has been sending the science, has been appending the science of astronomy. A million miles away, it's been beaming pictures back to Earth that have shocked and surprised scientists and stunned everyone with their beauty. We are lucky to have right here in the Northwest Ohio one of the main people responsible for the mirrors that are at the heart of the JWST. We couldn't pass up the opportunity to interview him. Even though this is a departure from our usual sort of guests, we hope you enjoy it. Come on, Josh, let's get on with the interview.
My name is Aaron Sayer, and I'm a metallurgist. I am a senior process engineer and a supervisor at Materion in Elmore, Ohio.
First of all, let me congratulate you on the incredible success of the James Webb Space Telescope, JWST. This was an enormous multi-year effort, and it's wonderful that everything has turned out so well.
Thank you. Yes, that's been a very exciting point in my career for sure. A long wait, and just proud of our part of it. How well it's been doing, like you said.
The mirrors on the telescope are made from beryllium. Could you tell us why beryllium was chosen and what kind of special processes you had to use to work with that material?
Well, beryllium has excellent optics. The Hubble telescope is, of course, just is a glass optical mirror. And so there's a few things with beryllium. It is, lighter than aluminum. So it's also much lighter than glass. So they could make a bigger mirror. And if you look at it, it's within segments, but it operates as like one primary mirror. And so it's, I think, about 5 or 6 times the size of the Hubble telescope mirror, if not more. But Hubble cannot really get into the infrared light, which is what the first light of the universe was after the Big Bang. And so the Webb telescope is also called the first light telescope. And so beryllium can see deep into the infrared as well as into, the white lights and things that we normally associate with Hubble or a regular telescope. And so the Webb telescope is able to kind of look in the past. As it looks out farther in the universe, it can actually see the infrared light. And when it sees that, it's looking back to like 200 or 300 million years after the Big Bang, which is when the universe was still in its infancy, and see more on how it was formed and how the galaxies and things were formed, planets, etc.
Mm-hmm. So how perfect are the mirrors? What was the margin of error while creating them?
I don't know if you know, they use unit of measure of angstroms. So I don't know if you know what that is.
Yeah,
but,
angstrom units, AU.
Right. So it took a year to polish each mirror. So they would polish and then they would put it in a vacuum, genic vacuum to mimic space to see how the shape of the mirror changed. And then they would do, the optics check, and then they bring it back out and polish out any imperfections so that all of them are, as close to perfect as they could get.
Mm-hmm. So instead of just one big mirror, James Webb telescope uses several smaller mirrors working together. Why is that?
It's mostly to get it into space, and also our limits on how big of a piece of beryllium we could make. Our process is we take beryllium and melted it, and then we sprayed it and atomized it into powder droplets. And that powder was then taken and blended into the chemistry required by NASA and developed with them. And then we consolidated that into the biggest shape that we could in a hot isostatic press at about 1,000 degrees Celsius. And then once those were taken out of those, we would cut them in half to make two mirrors and then heat treat them. And I was the engineer over the powder blending and then the heat treatment and then all the final properties. But the hexagonal shape is how they fit the mirrors together. They get the biggest surface area. And there's 18 mirrors in the primary mirror right now. So that is, a function of how big of a mirror we could make blank, and then how big into the Ariane rocket that launched it.
So could you share us a little bit of what you felt on the unfolding day? How were you feeling? Can you share us your feelings about that day?
Well, for perspective, I started working in 2003, and late 2003 and in early 2004 is when we started making the mirrors for the Webb telescope. So I've been waiting for, I waited almost 18 years for it to launch, when it finally did launch. And so that was very exciting. We were always, over that time, almost 2 decades, we were worried that they would lose funding, they would cancel the program, and we wouldn't see our work, to fruition. And so then there's also, when it was launching, there's always the concern, is the rocket going to explode? Is it going to unfold like it's supposed to? Is it going to get out to its destination 1 million miles out in space? So when all of those, points, when it reached all those milestones, and it took 6 months before they really started sending out, images that you could see, clearly stars and things, every step of the way, that was just, a new thrill to see it reach that, and some relief. And so just seeing the amazing photos and images that it's been sending back, daily, that there's people fighting to use time on the telescope, it's just amazing. And it's just been a real thrill to see the beryllium that, had a large part in making, and making sure these mirrors were as perfect as they could be for NASA in terms of properties and chemistry and things. It's just, I have a lot of pride that we had that, because any of the symbols of the Webb telescope is that hexagonal shape of the mirrors, or all 18 hexagonal mirrors. And it's just a huge source of pride for me to see that.
When I later read about that, I came to know that there were so many things that could go wrong. A small step could derail the entire project. So that was there were lots of uncertainties.
Yes, there were, yes.
Now, the next question, I think, is a very difficult one. Now, you see, the internet is flooded with these incredible images from the James Webb Space Telescope. Could you tell us one or two of your favorite ones, and maybe share why they are favorite? What is special about them?
There's the one that's called the Pillars of Creation. They talk about, and it is one of my favorite because it talks about this is where stars are made and galaxies are made in this part of space, and it's just amazing to think, to see how beautiful that is. And then they have what they call the Carina Nebula, and the image they show, that was one of the early images in the cosmic cliffs of the Carina Nebula, which is also a place where, stars and things are born. And it's just incredible to see, the space dust and things, couldn't really see through that with the Hubble. And now you can see all that detail within that. And then the Pillars of Creation, if I get that right, it looks like fingers, a hand that is reaching. I find that one fascinating because that one, each of those legs or fingers is, I believe, 5 light years in length.
Wow.
And I mean, if that doesn't, like, the immenseness of the universe, our ability to capture it, that just gives me chills to see that. And it's, again, it's just beautiful, just the detail that with the infrared abilities and the higher magnification and optics of the Webb telescope, able to see that detail is just incredible.
Well, that brings me to my next couple of questions, which are very sensitive. One thing we seem to be learning is that while there may be lots of Earth-like planets, so far none of them seem to be an Earth 2. There's always something not quite right, like having a sun with massive flares or gravity that is too high. How unique do you think Earth is in the galaxy?
Well, I think it is fairly unique, but just seeing, even like you said, within our own galaxy, how many stars there are, star systems, other solar systems, is there has to be something that would be similar to ours. I mean, it could be 1 in a trillion, but there's plenty of trillions of stars out there. You should be able to find another. So I'm hopeful that they're going to find something that looks like it may be able to sustain life, maybe not for humans, but maybe let's see some other form of or evidence of life. That's what I'm looking for, not necessarily an Earth 2 right away, but that would be the first one I'd like to see, these exoplanets that might have an atmosphere that would support some type of life.
So do you agree that Earth is placed in a perfectly balanced orbit and it is self-sustaining? And it's difficult to find very much similar like India.
Yeah, I once heard it described in a book that the Earth being created and supporting and even human life developing would be like a tornado going through a junkyard and forming a perfectly operational 747. So, I mean, there's that much detail and things that have to be perfect, so to speak, for it to happen. But I think it is possible, but, is the Webb telescope I really think it could find something that sustains some sort of life. Another Earth 2, I don't know. Well, I think based on what the Webb telescope does find, it will go. They're already planning the next telescope, whether it uses beryllium mirrors or not. I'm sure that would be one of its functions of, what the Webb finds, would build on that. And that I'm hoping would include looking for another Earth-type planet. But that would be probably decades away, but I do know that they're already in the works of the next space telescope.
Is it fair to say that one thing NASA studies of space has led to is a greater appreciation and love for our own beautiful planet and its functioning biosphere?
I think so. I mean, like you said, they didn't, day one turn it on and find, another Earth. So it's I think NASA does a good job of saying, here's the beauty of space and things we're looking, but they're also, this is the only one we've got. We haven't found another one. Let's take care of, this beautiful planet that we do have that has, the ability to sustain us and do so comfortably. And I hope that it would. I know that's a lot of you guys' mission is like cleaner energy and things like that, that we would work to try to preserve this. If we did find another Earth-like planet, it's not going to be one that we could ever get to anyway. It wouldn't, not for many, many, probably centuries, I would think, before something like that would be able to happen. But anyway, it is, it does show how unique we are. Definitely. You can only survive so long out in space. I mean, even the space station, National Space Station, has to be restocked regularly. It isn't self-sustaining. Maybe at some point, the moon missions, they're planning returning to the moon, they would be able to do a Martian, have some sort of sustaining, but it would never be enough for the billions on the planet. So again, this is, you see a lot of the doomsday movies where the Earth's dying and stuff. It turns into a dust bowl or something. I'm hoping that, we as humanity would be willing to reverse these effects and fight off climate change and things like that, and protect the planet, knowing that you can't just blast into space and go to the moon or Mars and be okay. This is, for humanity, this is what we need to take care of. It's our home planet, and we need to maintain it.
Mr. Aaron, it feels so nice to talk to you, and I really wish we could go more, but unfortunately we have to end. So before we close, is there anything you would like to add? Any advices, any comments, please?
I appreciate the time. I like talking about this project and my part in it. I'm just very proud of it, and I'm definitely interested in, spending more time listening to you guys' broadcasts and things like that, because there's the beauty in space, but, like you pointed out, the beauty on Earth as well. So hopefully we can continue to pursue and preserve both.
Okay, that was Aaron's here. So our dear listeners, hope you enjoyed the interview. Please let us know, how did you like hearing a pure science, non-ecological interview? Please send us your feedback to Joe at joedemeyer.forAgreenfuture.org. I repeat, Joe at joedemeyer.forAgreenfuture.org. Now let's hear from our advertisers and patrons.
For a Green Future is also brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They also restore wildlife habitats and lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. There are several ways to get a hold of them and find out what's happening. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. Another is to visit their website, www.wcparks.org. The website again is www.wcparks.org. They are also available on all social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and many others. Just search for WC Parks. That's the Wood County Park District, and we're very grateful for their support.
Dear listeners, this show, For a Green Future, is also brought to you by our patrons. These are forward-looking people who understand that information is vital to our democracy and the future. Most people aren't even aware that Biden administration is cutting down 50 million acres of our forests. Most don't even know to question the Republican statements about forest management. Increasingly, shows like ours are the only place people can hear the truth. It's vital that we continue to give people that information, and we are grateful to patrons who make that possible. Our patrons are people who have gone to the patreon.com, that is patreon.com, and searched For a Green Future. Our show popped up and they signed up to have a small donation come out of their account and over to us. That's how we can keep our show going. We are highly grateful to our patrons. Okay, now this is the part of the show where Rebecca takes over. Rebecca, take it away.
Alrighty, well, in honor of Pride Month, this being this month, although not in Toledo. Toledo Pride is in August for some reason. But yeah, I thought I would do the backpacking drag queen Patty Gonia, whose name is an obvious play on the outdoor company, gear company Patagonia. But yeah, Patty Gonia is a drag queen environmentalist, environmental and LGBTQ plus activist and community organizer, also known as Win Wiley when not in costume. Because it's different from trans people. With drag queens, when they're not in the costume, you can call them by their birth name. With trans people, that's very offensive. Always use their chosen name. But yeah, Patty/Win was born in 1992 in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm mostly going to be using the pronoun she here because we're dealing with the work as the character Patagonia, the Patagonia. Okay. So Ms. Gonia is the creative director and professional photographer, professionally, among other things, with a degree in advertising and public relations, and that's from the University of Nebraska. She started her drag career with the original drag name Ginger Snap, and because she has beautiful, beautiful auburn hair. Wow. And the Patagonia character was created in 2018 and does outdoor activism and content on TikTok and Instagram. Mostly. She kind of does environmentalist and LGBTQ plus causes in general, but also her kind of special areas: acceptance of queer identities in environmentalist and outdoor communities, which is intersectional environmentalism essentially. Other things she does would be organizing hikes and events for LGBTQ plus and environmental causes. She created a job board for queer outdoorists and co-founded the Outdoorist Oath nonprofit organization. She also partnered with the North Face company for 2022's Summer of Pride events, include outdoor community building activities, focused on engagement and acceptance of LGBTQ plus people in the environmental settings. And her special thing that she does is that she does garbage dresses, which are really very pretty. It doesn't even look like it was made out of garbage. I think being the professional photographer gives her an edge, kind of, because a lot of drag queens have sort of a cartoony, outrageous thing that I love. Saturday night in the club anyway. When they go to the library to read to children, they've got little ladylike day dresses on. But yeah, Patagonia's photographs and outfits are they have sort of a cartoony element to them, but they're also very pretty and just aesthetically nice, and that's nice to see. I'm all for people doing their own thing. So yeah, that's Patagonia.
Wow, I hope you enjoyed that one too. Now, dear listeners, we are on the last section of our show, that is ecological news. So here comes the news. Norway goes electric. We start out with some good news from Norway. In May of this year, Norwegian auto sales hit 91% plug-in electric vehicles. The internal combustion engine is dead in Norway. 81% of the cars were full electric, 5% were plug-in hybrids, and 5% were electric vans. All over the world, electric vehicle sales are booming. They grew from just 4% in 2020 to 14% in 2022 and are projected to reach 18% by the end of this year. Norway leads the world by far, though with more than double as many electric cars per 1,000 people as the next nearest nation, Greenland, and 4 times as many as the number 3 country, Sweden. However, The number of electric cars sold is the highest in China, followed by the United States. Since those countries have so many more people, China accounts for 59% of all electric vehicles sold worldwide. But only 25% of new cars sold in China are electric. In the US, electric car sales have increased to 7%. Moving on to the next news. Palo Vedre nuclear plant emergency shutdown. On Friday, June 2nd, Palo Vedre, the Unit 2 nuclear power plant, had an emergency shutdown. Coolant pumps failed, causing water levels starting to lower. Auxiliary feed water pumps had to be activated to prevent the core from being exposed and causing a meltdown. According to the report to the NRC, this is the second failure in about 2 months. Back in April, Unit 1, the largest nuclear plant in the US, had another emergency shutdown. 4 major systems failed, one after the other. First, there was a main turbine trip, possibly caused by hydraulics failure. Then, the output breakers failed to open. Then, the fast buses failed. And finally, the coolant pumps failed, leading to cooling water levels lowering. Every nuclear plant is a potential nuclear disaster. As US plants are pushed far beyond their designed capacity, both in terms of generation and age, we come closer and closer to the next disaster. What's especially worrying about this failure
was that automatic systems failed, and if the plant operators hadn't responded correctly, Unit 2 would have melted down, and Arizona would now be evacuating hundreds of thousands of people. Moving on to the next news. Solar farms good for wildlife. A study in the UK
by Solar Energy UK shows that solar farms provide havens for critically endangered bird species. The 6-year study inventoried the number of species of birds, bees, and butterflies before and after a solar farm was built. The number of bird species doubled from 17 to 34. It's especially important to note that the number of species that were listed as amber or red increased the most. That is roughly equivalent to threatened or endangered in the US. The solar farm was purposefully seeded with flower and other plants that encourage pollinators. The improvement was even more dramatic for pollinating insects. The number of butterfly and bee species increased from 4 in 2016 to 15 in 2021, more than tripling in 5 years. Now we move on to next news. Sea surface temperatures off the charts. In April of this year, the surface temperature of the world's oceans leapt off into temperatures never seen before. NOAA keeps a record
based on a blending of data from satellites, buoys, and ships. Temperatures are right now a full degree Celsius
above the 1982 to 211 average. Temperatures have not come back down and remain far above normal. This increase in the area of the ocean between 60 degrees north and 60 degrees south. Meteorologists are calling this level of heat catastrophic. In a related story, the NOAA has officially declared that El Nino has formed. This will lead to increased Pacific cyclones, intense rainfall in parts of the US, and overall hotter temperatures all over the globe. We move on to the next news. Indigenous rights threatened in Brazil. The lower house of Brazil's parliament, the Congress, has passed Bill PL 2903. It simply eliminates the rights of indigenous people to have the land that they live on. For decades, Brazil has recognized that tribes that live in the Amazon have a right to stay there and should have control over how those lands are used. Essentially, Brazil recognizes the tribe's ownership of the land. If this law passes the upper house, called the Federal Senate, no one will be considered the owner of the land, and loggers, miners, and farmers will be free to destroy the forest. Most often, the tribal members are murdered or chased off their lands by paramilitary forces if they lose the right to live there. The NGO Articulation of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil, or APIB for short, is calling for a worldwide mobilization against the law. We move on to the next news. FERC destroyed by Joe Manchin. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, does not have a chair, thanks to Senator Joe Manchin, who refuses to vote on President Biden's nominee. The FERC Board of Directors is supposed to have 5 members. Right now, it has only 4, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. This means all votes on controversial issues are split. While Biden appointed a temporary chair, Willie Phillips, most issues will not be addressed while there is no majority. So the FERC is essentially paralyzed, thanks to Joe Manchin. Wind and solar overtake fossil fuels in the European Union.
Finally, to end with on some good news, in May, wind and solar generated more power in the European Union than all sources of carbon energy combined. Solar energy generated 14% of the energy in the European Union,
while wind generated 17% of the total 31%. Fossil fuel dropped to only 25%, with the biggest drop coming from coal, which dropped to a record low of 10%. The move away from fossil fuels in the European Union has been massively accelerated by the Russia-Ukraine war. As companies try to become independent of Russian gas supplies, rooftop solar was the biggest gain. And I think this is one of the, looking at the brighter side of a very sad event, in this case, the Russia-Ukraine war.
but what is really coming out of that is how the Ukrainian people are
setting themselves free from this dependency of the fossil fuel. And this dependency on fossil fuel was giving an upper hand, kind of an upper hand to the Russian government or the Russian monarchs or oligarchs, what they say. I'm not very good with international politics, but as a layman, this is, I think, what I understand. So when I look at the brighter side, it's a great feat, a great achievement by the Ukrainian people, I must say. They are trying to get themselves off this dependency. And also, I mean, it is giving a big setback to the Russians as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as the companies try to become independent of Russian gas supplies, rooftop
solars was the biggest gain. If the European Union can do it,
I think the US can do it too. All we need to do
is eliminate the laws and policies that are holding us back.
Like Bowling Green's penalty for having solar panel. So, I mean, there are so many different things they are putting up, different kinds of policies and clauses in those policies which hold us back from, exploring our full potential to utilize wind and other natural sources of energy. See, what I really find interesting, when we were talking to Aaron Sear in his interview, he mentions that he is studying, he was part of a project which observed and studied planets at cosmic level. Okay. Now he said that although the biosphere is very important and very critical for planet Earth, and they are finding planets like exoplanets which are suitable for life, but the thing is that we don't have the technology to travel to those Earth 2 planets,
Right.
even though they provide more better environment and natural resources for us humans. But the traveling to that particular planet, maybe in some other galaxy or some other solar system, so it's a Herculean task. Our generation or the level of science and technology is not that advanced that we can try. So like you said, we are kind of betting 50-50 whether we destroy our planet before we try to figure out a way to transfer the millions of people to a different planet.
Plus, when you give some expensive toy to a little kid and they immediately destroy it, you figure, okay, you don't get another one for a few years. Why should we just get more and more planets to ruin? That's not the way. We don't get any more planets till we learn to take care of a planet, I think.
Yeah, that is correct.
I wanted to point out to you, I've had like 3-4 friends point out to me that they're having symptoms this week in Northwest Ohio. People have been outside and had burning throats, coughing, sneezing, trouble breathing, that kind of thing. I've been mostly all right. Mostly when it was just really, really hot, I had some trouble breathing because of my COVID damaged lungs. But
Wow.
so yeah, there's that. Also, I wanted to, if we have a couple minutes here, we maybe talk about something Joe told me to do, but I forgot last week, called semelparity. Semelparity is a thing where basically many organisms die after they first reproduce. They just, salmon are like a famous example of this. Swim upstream, mate, lay eggs, and die. But so it's the opposite of what you call heteroparity, which is where you live on to reproduce multiple times after that. With plants, they call it monocarpy versus polycarpy. I'm guessing polycarpy is reproducing multiple times. That makes it poly, mono. So, yeah, examples would be salmon, bamboo, insects, grain crops, spiders, and some marsupials, some Australian marsupials. Just live for a season and then die apparently after they reproduce. Although monocarpy in plants can also mean just individual shoots die after reproducing. So it's like if every time you had a baby, your genitals rotted and fall off, and you grow another pair. Which I would be very disconcerting. I would not like that.
Oh my God.
People would have fewer children, I feel like, if that.
But don't you see and feel like how variety and different kind of things our nature has?
Yeah.
That's simply amazing.
Yeah, I guess that, semelparity has evolved multiple times in different times and places from heteropathic ancestors. Meaning that, like, its ancestors lived to reproduce multiple times, but this organism decided that it would be an advantage if it just, had a bunch of babies and then died. But it's complicated. I had trouble understanding this, but apparently it has to do with adult mortality rates, because if there's a pretty good chance you're not going to live till the next reproduction cycle anyway, you might as well have a bunch at once, and it's like 2 to 5 times the number of babies that you would have if you were gonna, if you were just having one baby this season or just reproducing once this season. Apparently all annual plants are semelparous, but not all perennials are heteroparous, because you have perennials that invest in a couple of years in growth, so it takes them a couple of years to grow and reach maturity, and then they have a bunch of babies and die.
Oh my God. So that is really strange.
Yeah, it's weird the way that things happen. It really is. So yeah, they 2 to 5 times in a single try.
Yeah. So I mean, I just quickly want to take this as an opportunity. Like you mentioned, you received some SMSs, messages, and emails from your listeners. See, this is the beauty when the listeners uh, try to reach us through emails or through text messages, and they try to provide us so many insightful information what is happening around them. And many vigilant and active members of the society, they reach out to us and they email us, they tell us what is their observations. So we always welcome our listeners to reach out to us through calling us on our phone, texting us, or you can also email us at joe@joedemayer for a green future.org. So that has been very exciting and very foggy and hazy week
Yes.
due to the Canadian forest fires, but it also gives us reason to look into the nature we are living around. So
Definitely.
that is it for the show. And before I say goodbye, would you like to say anything, Rebecca?
That's it for me. Have a good week, everybody.
Have a nice weekend. Enjoy the wonderful Sunday.
No. I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done.